Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast. Life looks different now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 22. And from reading Genesis chapter 22, we learned that God gave Abraham the ultimate test. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, his heir, his long awaited son, Isaac. And we learned that Abraham did not hesitate. He woke up the next day after receiving the instruction and just went straight to the mountain to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. We learned that the son was old enough to ask questions. He was very curious and wondered, why is it that they had the wood, they had the fire, but they did not have the lamb to sacrifice? We learned that when Abraham got on top of the mountain and he had bounded his son and put him on top of the wood to kill him, God called from above. A voice called from above and ordered Abraham to put down the knife, to not kill Isaac, but instead God provided a sacrifice to Abraham. A ram was caught behind them, and Abraham sacrificed the ram instead of his son. Now, this week, we are going to read Genesis chapter 23. Let's see what lesson we can learn from Genesis chapter 23. Now, before I read Genesis chapter 23, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are eager to learn the Word of God, others want to do the same. Give them the gift of knowledge, and of course, you will also be helping this channel to grow. Thank you so much for your support. Now let's get on reading Genesis chapter 23. Sarah's death and burial. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah, and Sarah died at Kiryat-ba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and a foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choices of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field. For a full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in the gate of his city. No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed down to the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, But if you will, hear me. I give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron and Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, before all who went in the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The fields and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place by the Hittites. So Genesis chapter 23 is the record of Sarah's death. So we learned from the previous chapters that Sarah was 90 years old when she gave birth to Isaac, their long-awaited promised son. God promised Abraham when he was 75 years old that he will have a son of his own. He will have an heir with Sarah. And in chapter 20, that came into fruition. Now we are learning that Sarah was very blessed. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. And as we can see here, Sarah's death was the first female death ever recorded in the Bible. Because up until that point, we learned the genealogy of Noah. We learned who all the men who were born and died. But never before have the Bible ever mentioned a woman's death and how long she had lived. But here we learned that Sarah lived 127 years. She lived a very, very long life. And after her death, Abraham went into mourning. According to tradition, around that time, Abraham would have mourned for 7 days because that's what tradition called for. So he mourned his wife, his long life wife, Sarah, for 7 days, for the period that was called for. And after mourning her, he decided that it was time to bury her. Now we have to remember, Sarah was 10 years younger than her husband. And it was very unusual for women, even till today, for women to die before their spouses, especially given that there was such an age gap between the two. But God had promised Abraham that he would be living a very, very long life. So it's pretty clear here that Abraham is continuing on living. He was 137 years old, while his wife Sarah was 127 years old when she died. This woman was, beside him through all the hardships. She was beside him, when he was seeking God. She was beside him when he left his father's home and moved into a place that was unknown to them. She was beside him when he basically lied and she was taken as Pharaoh's wife. And then when she was taken as Abimelech's wife, this woman stood by her man. And so naturally, Abraham lost something great, something that was precious to him, something that was beautiful and wonderful to him. That was his lifelong wife. So naturally, he was mourning. And after mourning his wife, he needed a place to bury her. Now we have to remember Abraham was a very wealthy man. Around that time, you knew how wealthy someone was, like we mentioned before, by the amount of cattle and the amount of servants and slaves they had. So we know that Abraham had a lot of wealth, Yet he did not own any land because Abraham was always sojourning into a different land. He always had to move into a different land. He moved, to Egypt for famine. He moved to the space where Abimelech is as we speak. He moved to Mamre. He has always had to move. So naturally, he did not own any land. And now that his wife has passed on, he had to go to the people of the Hittites. Now remember, God had already promised the land of Canaan to Abraham. And now he's living there. But the people of the Hittites had possession of the land. He's living in that land. He's a sojourner. He's a foreigner living in that space. He did not own any land. So now he had to go to the people. And Abraham revealed to the local Hittites there that he's just a sojourner. He's just a foreigner. And he didn't have any land in that space. So he went to them asking for land so he can bury his wife. And naturally, the Hittites have heard stories of Abraham. They've heard how Abraham, how his wife was taken by King Abimelech and how King Abimelech got punished for it. So naturally, the Hittites are a bit afraid of Abraham because they knew that he was a prince. He was a prophet of the Lord, of the Most High. So they've heard the stories. And naturally, they didn't even want to charge him any fees for the land that he was seeking so he can bury his wife. They simply said to him, we're more than happy to give you a space, a great land, so you can bury your dead. You see, they were more than happy. Out of fear, I suppose, they wanted to give it to him. They wanted to offer to him the finest grave to bury his wife. And we learn here that Abraham refused to accept the gift from the Hittites. He simply said, no, thank you. So see, we have to see here that Abraham was a man full of integrity. You see, over the past 25 years, as a matter of fact, now, over the past almost 50 years, he's been walking with God, walking with the Lord. And he's made a lot of mistakes. He has, he got a lot of possession from being devious, from lying, to Pharaoh. And when Pharaoh took his wife as his own and had to return his wife after God put a plague on the whole country because of Sarah, Pharaoh returned Sarah to Abraham, but also gave Abraham a lot of wealth. So he was being devious, he got rewarded. And he did it again when Sarah was almost 90 years old. She was 89 years old. He again lied to King Abimelech, and there Sarah was taken again as King Abimelech's wife. And when King Abimelech discovered what had transpired, he gave Abraham even more wealth. But here we are learning that Abraham no longer wanted to take anything that did not belong to him. He no longer wanted to have any kind of wealth out of fear or out of, his devious nature. He wanted to make sure that he is now walking with God in integrity because he had made a covenant with God that he will do so moving forward, right before Isaac was born. And here, Abraham just turned down this gift from the Hittite people. He refused to accept it. He simply said, no, thank you. He offered to pay full market value for the price of the land. You know, I have met some very generous men over the years. I've met some generous people, but I've also met some, you know, people who are just point blank stingy. They always want a free lunch. They always want something for free. They maneuver their way so they don't have to pay a fee for the things they want. They're always looking for a free lunch. But we can see here, Abraham is a man of high integrity. Abraham is a man who's learning along the way, and he no longer wanted any more, anything free that did not belong to him. So he turned them down. And here, instead, he offered to pay the full price. Now, without haggling, without complaining, when Ephron, the owner of the land that Abraham wanted to bury his wife at, was present, and Ephron, of course, wanted to give him the land, and Abraham said no, he wanted to pay. Ephron simply mentioned that the land was worth about 400 shekels of silver. Abraham did not haggle. He did not complain. He did not try to negotiate. He simply weighed the 400 shekels of silver and paid Ephron for the land that he wanted, so he can bury his wife, Sarah, at the cave named Machpelah. Now, the word Machpelah in Hebrew means double. So it's very possible that that cave had maybe a double entrance to the interior of the caves. Maybe there was a double entrance, or maybe, you know, it could have had two spaces, two burial spaces for Sarah, and of course for Abraham to later be buried in. So he specifically asked for that land because it was a great land, and this is actually the only land that Abraham ever possessed, because Abraham did not own any land. Abraham was constantly moving, but it was the last time that Abraham had to move, and he trusted that God will be giving all of that land to his descendants. So he wasn't concerned, but he bought that land where the cave of Machpelah located. And that tomb was now Abraham's sole possession. And his whole lifetime, that was his sole, physical land that he ever owned. That land, that space became an ancestral grave where Abraham and his whole family can be buried. Now, that tomb was Abraham's sole possession in his whole lifetime. Even though Abraham was a wealthy man, he didn't possess any land. And that tomb was the only land that he has ever possessed. And that land became an ancestral grave where his whole family can be buried. Where, of course, we will later on learn that's where Abraham will also be buried. So this chapter is a little bit different, because we are now learning of the death of Sarah. But what I do like about this chapter is the fact that we are seeing the growth that has been taking place with Abraham. Abraham was not seeking free lunch. He was not, as he was grieving his wife, he wanted to really walk in integrity. He wanted to be honest. He wanted to do what's right. Even though he could have gotten that grave, that whole land for free, because the Hittites were very much afraid of him, fearful of him, because they knew that he walked with the Lord. He was a prophet, and God will always protect him. But Abraham did not try to capitalize on that. He did not try to capitalize on their fear. He wanted to pay a fair market value, and he did just that. And I like that. I like that he's really helping us understand, first of all, it's okay to grieve our lost ones, because we're learning he grieved the death of his wife. It's very important that we take the time to grieve the loss of a loved one. And it's also important that we are willing to pay the price for the things that we want. That's so important here. And it's great to see that Abraham has become a man of integrity. Integrity. So I hope that you learned something new this week. And of course, don't forget to leave comments, to leave questions. Go back to the previous, episodes, and anything that you want to learn, any questions that you may have, I'm here to do my best to answer them. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you're gonna have a wonderful week. I am praying for you. Until next time, darlings. Bisous.